Hi, man.
What's up, dude?
I'm so happy to do this with you.
I know. I feel like the last time we recorded together was that when we were in Montana. Is that the last time?
Um, no, I think
'Cause
that we recorded
we did the RV
we did the RV,
series.
and then
Two of those, huh?
was the Montana one right after that?
It's either or. I remember. So the RV was during Christmas, and the Montana one was right around my birthday because I flew out to you.
Yeah,
We did the hike and stuff. So, but yeah. Either way, it's been a good year.
year
two?
and a half.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be catching up with you, man.
I know.
It's been a big last year. But let's not make it too broad. So you got a hyperbaric chamber.
I do.
You didn't read the directions.
I'm not a big fan of instructions.
Yeah, superfluous.
Huh?
Superfluous. You don't need instructions.
I think it stems from like I like understanding why things are the way they are, and instruction manuals don't really touch on that. They're just like put bolt A in slot A, and you're like, why?
But I need to know the why.
I want to understand.
What's the deeper reasoning behind
How
this?
did you come to this as being the most optimal way? And I mean, I just remember being a kid and I was just like, Legos, I had a ton of Legos, but I don't think I ever built like the actual thing it was supposed to be because I would just throw it away, the like spaceship design.
Yeah.
And it would look pretty shitty, but like I love building things. And so when I see instruction manuals, it kind of takes that feeling away that like I'm building it. I'm just like building it for someone else.
Right. You want to figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
Added complexity. You should hang out at IKEA more, dude.
I know.
Just try to assemble an IKEA
Without
bookshelf without instructions.
Luck.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned, and you learn really quick, and sometimes the hard way, why things are the way they are. Because it's like for the hyperbaric chamber, it's like you might explode. For example,
right? I thought you were going to explode.
Yeah.
I saw you in your office and that thing was ballooning out and you're like,
should have read the instructions.
Help!
Yeah, I mean, so for those of you who don't know, hyperbaric chamber is basically a chamber that's set up to be inflated with oxygen, so much so that it pressurizes. So much pressure that it basically simulates more pressure than you're feeling here on sea level. And in the case of the one that we got, it's 1.3 atmospheres, which is like the equivalent of sitting about 10 feet underwater. So if you've like dove in a deep pool and you try to touch the bottom, even in like an 8-foot pool, you'll feel the pressure on, you'll probably need to equalize. Most people do. It feels subtle, but when you're down there, that pressure is actually affecting a lot more than just, your ears. It's affecting your blood flow. And when you're in a hyperbaric chamber, that's kind of the purpose of it. You're basically like restricting blood flow and then depressurizing. You're expanding it, right? And hopefully expanding it into areas of your mind or your body where there's not a lot of blood flow happening. So a lot of people are using hyperbaric chambers for healing, and it could be inflammation, it could be a broken bone, but it could be PTSD. They're finding that PTSD, in a lot of cases, it's just an inactivity of region of the brain, or like there's no more blood flow going there. And so they're seeing that spending time under pressure and going there and coming back can, push blood into these blood vessels that have become like almost atrophied in many ways.
Do you need to clear your ears when you're in the hyperbaric chamber?
Yeah.
It feels like you're underwater.
Yeah, you basically turn it on and then it starts to inflate, and then you'll start to feel that same exact feeling. Yeah, and I'd done them before and felt good. And the reason why I'm doing it, I don't necessarily have an acute injury, but we are all like the aging process is just like a series of injuries to your cells, essentially. Like we're just constantly damaging our cells, our skin cells, every cell in our body over time becomes so damaged that we eventually pass away. And so, there's the extreme case of using this to literally recover from like a broken bone, but there's a lot of popularity being pushed to hyperbaric chambers for longevity. Because you're effectively just going to the core problem. How do I minimize the damage or repair the damage? And if you can do that, then you hypothetically won't age if you're not damaging those cells or if you keep refreshing them. And so for me, I'm like reflecting over the last couple of years, which I'm sure we'll dive into more, you know, running a company, even if it's like, you know, sometimes I like am kind of ashamed about some of the stress. I'm like, it's just like a tea company. It's a beverage. Like, how stressful can it be? And like, you look at what we do in the world, and it's all about health and wellness. But the reality is, it doesn't really matter what company you're running. When it starts to succeed, it gets hard. Success is actually hard in many ways, and you see this across sports as well. But in pretty much any other field. But like with us, it's like more people, more obligations, more responsibilities, more investors, and all of these things start to add up, and it gets really stressful. And stress over time does do damage. And I've noticed it. My ability to handle stress, you know, has fluctuated a bit. And if I'm not recovering through sleep and these other methods that are more natural, I'm like, I need to do something else, right? And had a kid recently, so the sleep is hard to come by, and I'm like, I'm going to invest in my health and see if this can, you know, help me handle more, help me continue to maintain that kind of pace that I started with. And then I didn't want to read the instructions, so I jumped in the thing.
Fucking almost blew yourself up.
Yeah, I jump in this thing. And, you know, I'd done it before, so I got the general principle. Like, you basically enclose yourself in it, and then it pressurizes. So I zip myself up, grab a book, it's starting to pressurize. It continues to pressurize. And all of a sudden, I'm like, this is, like, really pressurized. Like, it's a soft casing, and it was, like, rock hard. And all of a sudden, I heard, like, this little, like, psss. I'm like, what? What's that? And I like look down, and it's like emergency like pressure valve, and it's like activated or something. And in the process of looking down, the whole tank started to like roll side to side
because a bubble boy.
I forgot to put these, you know, I kind of pulled these things out. I'm like, what are these? And it turns out they're wedges for when it's inflated to keep it from rolling
so
over.
You don't roll away down Main Street in
and so I'm in this thing. It's a huge bubble. Psst, there's kind of like some like beeping sound I can hear in the distance, and it's rolling. And I'm like, oh shit, like, I wonder if it stops pressurizing at a certain point, or if I have to like do something to make it stop. And I'm like looking around, I don't see anything. And I'm like, I should just like unzip it and like get out of here quick, abort. And I go to unzip, and there's this big thing that says, warning, do not unzip unless deflated. And I'm like, okay, that was my deflation strategy. Now what? And so luckily there were some people here at the office, and I called Johnny. I'm like, dude, get in here, man. And he's like, walks in. He's like, what's going on here? I'm like rolling around in this big bubble, and there's beeps and sounds and air.
Danger, Will Robinson. Yeah. Danger.
Anyways, I survived. We figured it out.
What's the name of the hyperbaric chamber?
The one that I got, the brand is called Henshaw.
Henshaw.
Yeah, they're made in the UK, and they were referred to me from a trusted friend. So
is it true that you called the founder while inside?
I did. Yeah, he didn't pick up.
Bro.
I like texted him.
Is this thing gonna explode on me?
Yeah, I mean, he's in the UK, so he didn't pick up. And I was like, I'm fucked.
This is how it's all gonna end. 10 feet underwater.
So
if you died there, would you technically have drowned?
Oh, that's a good question. I would have imploded, I feel like, you know, because just too much pressure.
Yeah.
And the other
too much. He couldn't handle the pressure of being a CEO. He just imploded.
And the other subtle detail was there's 3 devices that you basically plug into this thing, and 2 of them were very obvious to me, but then there's this other one, and I was like, I'm not sure if like this is necessary. Turns out that's the cooling and dehumidifying device. And so while I'm going through that, like, this is probably going to explode, it's also like 100 degrees and super humid. So I'm sweating bullets. And by the time Johnny got in there and like unplugged everything and I unzipped it, I was like Ace Ventura climbing out of the rhino's ass, like sticking to everything and like all sweaty. Like,
look, the mother rhino is giving birth.
Yeah. So, it was an experience, man. It's a full-on wellness journey.
What book were you reading in there?
I was reading, I think I was just starting Dare to Lead. by Brene Brown. Don't ask me too much about it. I just got started. But in general, it's about practicing vulnerability as a leader. Yeah, just getting started. But I've heard amazing things from some powerful women on our team about it.
I've heard very good things about Brene Brown.
Oh, yeah.
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 What was Island like? You were telling me about that book, but and I want to read that.
Yeah. So for some reason, 6 months ago, I was like, I want to read a book about like an alternative utopian type society. And I think I was just like looking around at culture and, wanting to see like, is there other people exploring kind of like ground up other solutions? Like what could that look like? You start to think about like, if we had the technology that we had today, but we are also starting over, like what would we do differently from that perspective? And so I started to look up like is what books are out there on this topic, and there's a book called Island by Aldous Huxley, and I believe it was the last book he wrote before passing away, and he passed away kind of shortly after writing it. It's a very verbose book, but the general premise is about this island it takes place in like the 80s, I believe, but there's this island that's sort of protected from the outside world, and they're able to keep these core values despite, modern culture and technology. And there's kind of this battle between the old guard and like the youth and pretty much everyone in the society that is, still on board and, really thriving under those conditions and those core values that, aren't associated with capitalism and pillaging the planet and kind of this never-ending chase for more and more and more. But then the whole island is about to become inherited by this young prince. And the young prince is kind of has traveled to Europe and seen the glamour and the Ritz and the oil money, and he's about to take the reign. And you're kind of seeing these like power dynamics and how to navigate that, like what, and it kind of ends like you don't really know what's going to happen next. But through the journey, you learn about their culture, and you kind of see the beauty of it. And it's everything from, there's like a sacred sacrament of like mushrooms, all the way down to like the lack of technology and everybody really abiding by this like philosophy or almost like religion of love and feeling, just like feeling things, and radical openness and honesty. And it trickles down to like how they raise their kids. They have multiple parents. Like there's the birthing parent, but everybody also has like multiple, like I forget what they call them, but they're like adopted parents essentially, and they go and live with those families certain times of the year, and you get this sort of cross-pollination of ideas and ideals, and you really allow people to kind of come up into their own. Like they're not getting prescribed to as much. And so yeah, it was a really amazing book.
I interviewed a guy named Zach earlier today for the podcast who runs Fly Ranch, which is the permanent Burning Man project, which is 12 miles past Burning Man. And they're trying to start a permanent alternative community to essentially use a lot of the principles that Burning Man abides by, but see if they can do it permanently. Yeah. And out there, they have these geysers, they have hot springs, they have day tours, so people can come out and volunteer. They can bring art out there. And I'm very interested in that question that you just asked, is if we had all the technology that we have today, but we could build it from the ground up and we could change culture and we could change our values, how would society be different?
Yeah.
Because so often we're just inside culture and it's this massive weather system that we don't even question. Mm-hmm. We don't question why we value certain things, why we're chasing status in these ways. And as you always say, shaking up your snow globe and visiting alternative communities is, I think, very healthy.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And travel is very similar to a psychedelic experience or a mind conscious altering experience, because it kind of provides you a glimpse into a new way of being or thinking, right? It's like, oh, we kind of, I think we're evolved in many ways to patternize the world, And there's a lot of upside to that because it allows us to navigate the world safely. And it's also more efficient because we can kind of see patterns and we don't have to allocate a ton of time relearning, like, what is that? What should I expect? How should I expect it to act? But when it's out of balance, it can, confine us. And we tend to, believe, if not exposed to new ways of thinking or believing, we can live our whole lives being like, this is right, this is wrong, this is what's good, this is what's bad, this is what's cool, this is what's not cool. When you simply just fly to another country or culture and you're like, oh, well, they kind of see things totally different, and that's fine too. And so you can come back to your culture and you don't have to change. I don't think it's about changing for change's sake. It's about like adopting the way that you live yourself, like not having it prescribed to you. Like a lot of our early advertising was around coffee and, we're not mad at coffee, we're just disappointed. It's less about getting people to not drink coffee and more about getting people to drink what they actually want to drink. And when I look back on myself and my, morning ritual journey, once I got into the tech space and was working in the office environment, it wasn't a question, like it wasn't like a, what should I do today? It's like, no, you start with the coffee, and then someone at some point the other day was like, you want to go grab a cup of coffee? And, it just happened, and I didn't think about it. And so it wasn't a conscious decision that I made. Then once I started to think about it, I was like, well, in my case, I actually don't thrive off a lot of caffeine. Other people, it's totally fine. But I think the core problem is do we have agency over those decisions? And that's what I'm really inspired by, is like that inspiring curiosity, and essentially through curiosity granting people that agency. And I think when you go to a place like Burning Man, you are really confronted with a lot of your insecurities, and you're like, why do I, that person's running around in a tutu, why does that make me feel weird? Like, what is going on? And then all of a sudden, maybe you, the next day, you have a tutu on. You're like, why did I ever give a fuck about that? I just got confronted and I just overcame some belief that I had that, wearing tutu equals X, when that's just a story. And that's one example, but there's many, right? And you feel it when you're traveling, you feel it when you go to a crazy place like Burning Man, and you feel it when you take psilocybin too.
Right. Speaking of which, you were just interviewed for a documentary on microdosing. Tell me about MUD WTR's microdosing policy.
Do it if you want. I mean, I'm not in the position to tell anybody what to do with their body. And, companies allowing employees to take drugs at work sounds crazy, but it's not new. We just don't consider caffeine to be a drug, or alcohol for that matter. If you go to pretty much any tech company in the world, probably, and you walk into their kitchen, you're going to see a machine that produces liquid with high doses of caffeine, which is a drug. And use of it daily, multiple times a day, is encouraged. And then if you go into their fridge, you're probably going to see beers, you're probably going to see wine, you're probably going to see freaking spritzers or whatever else people are drinking now. Those are drugs. And so, yeah, people think that those drugs are for some reason better than these other drugs. But for me, it's it's up to the person, right? And, that's the surface level answer. On a deeper level, I've personally found a lot of benefit in microdosing, both for the reasons that we were just talking about, where you're just getting exposed and becoming aware of the patterns. You don't necessarily need to make big changes in your life once you're aware of them, but that simple awareness starts to make you understand who you are. You're no longer just the person that is only reading, read instruction manuals more, Shane, okay?
I started microdosing and realized I should read instructions.
But at the same time, it's all balance, right? And I think for a large part of my life, in many ways, like maybe I didn't read the instruction manuals for Legos, but I was being prescribed like instructions on how to live life. Like what should you believe? What should you not believe? Like what's right, what's wrong? And once you start to, throw that out and learn about what you feel is right and wrong, I think that's where life gets really interesting. And then on maybe like a more woo level, I have this belief that underneath it all, underneath, your cognitive mind, your default mode network, your instinct, even your intuition, there's another intelligence that's deeper. Like what the thing that's telling your heart to beat, the thing that's telling your lungs to breathe, the things that's, when you plant a seed, it knows what to grow into. It looks like a little black seed at first and can grow into this beautiful flower. Like what is guiding that intelligence? Some might call it God. Some might call it like whatever. It doesn't really matter what it's called. But I think that you can tune into that. And I think that when you tune into that, what you create and how you show up in the world is generally harmonized with that energy. And that energy to me is like the energy I want to be harmonized with.
What role does ceremony play in your life?
Yeah. So I define ceremony as an intentional way to celebrate something. Like it could be anything, but it's like an intentional celebration. It's like an acknowledgement. And the most common times that I that I do participate in a ceremony is when there's a change, or either there's a change that has occurred, like becoming a father. Some ways it was out of my control. And then, there's some things that I want to call into the world. So when I started MUD WTR, for example, it started fast, and it started really scrappy. Quickly, I was able to raise investment that allowed me to quit my job and focus on it full time. But that was a big responsibility to bear. We had venture capitalists invest, but there was also friends and family. My sister invested, close friends that I knew they don't have millions of dollars, right? But they're giving their money they believe in me. They believe that I can turn this into something, turn their money into something. And I remember feeling the burden of that responsibility and wanting to acknowledge that, because it's a lot to bear. And back to like tuning into that thing, I didn't feel like I wanted to rely on just my skill set or my rational reasoning default mode network. Like there's no way that just me as just like a person could make this happen. I wanted to tune into something bigger and greater than myself. And I felt like I needed to in order to truly, protect their investment, to like make this happen and also make it happen in a way that is not compromising my core values, which inherently I want to align with that thing, that source. And so after the investment closed, I embarked on a 3-month microdosing of ayahuasca, actually, the ayahuasca vine. And every morning I had a ceremony, essentially. So it was like a 3-month, 90-day ceremony that I would partake in every morning, just to like really ground myself into the responsibility, the thing that I was embarking on, and calling in, like essentially it was like a prayer, calling in for support. And it took discipline, and I think that was an important thing too, where the discipline, like I remember that. I remember the, day 20, I'm still doing it today. I'm tired today, I'm still doing it today, and that repetition, I think, really laid kind of this groundwork that when times got hard, when, I was like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I'm in the commercial kitchen, it's 4 a.m., I'm covered in cacao. Like, is this even going to work? Like, I was like, no, I'm here. Like, this is, like, I just trusted, you know what I mean? So it just gave me that momentum. And so that's one example of a ceremony. Another is when Eliza and I found out we were having a child. And similarly, large responsibility, right? Huge life shift. And I knew, again, that I didn't want to rely on just myself to muscle through this thing. I wanted to tap into something bigger. So we've done a few different things throughout the period of pregnancy before birth, but right before birth, we both went out to the beach and we wrote down like deep intentions, pretty much a letter to our son, our coming son, Lion, and read them aloud and lit this like little bonfire on the beach and burnt it up. You know, just like it's something. A ceremony isn't anything. It's whatever you. It's, you know, some ceremonies are in Peru and they're this way. You can build a ceremony if it's meaningful to you. That's what's important.
What did the morning ayahuasca microdose ceremony look like?
Yeah, so I had the juice.
Got that vine, son.
Got that vine.
Which tastes like old Jägermeister and sawdust.
It's kind of like
and spirit,
rotten Fernet.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was.
And God.
God, yeah. So yeah, it was. You basically have a tablespoon of the vine. I'm sitting down. I have, you know, a little like mini shrine like set up. And I think layers are important. So I had, you know, there's a certain smell to it, and, you know, it's in the morning, the lights dim, and I had a certain song that I would listen to, and then I'd have a tablespoon of this. You're not getting high. I think that's probably like one of the misconceptions about microdosing in general. It's not necessarily about that, and this specifically wasn't about that at all. The vine is actually it's not going to get you high. But it's not going to get you high in the way that you think when you're hearing about ayahuasca. This was more of a dieta in many ways. So as part of it, I was also eating a very clean diet. There's no alcohol, there's no drugs, none of that. I was eating super light, like a lot of khichdi, a lot of very light foods. And you're basically, the intention of a dieta is like you're kind of reducing down the spiritual noise of food, and you're allowing one plant to come in and speak to you. And so it's not the like 3-hour, 6-hour journey of blah, 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 but it was like a 3-month prolonged, like intense thing that was definitely felt, but it's kind of hard to describe because you're not like, I saw a jaguar, but you feel different after, right? And so, yeah, teaspoon, then I'm sitting in sort of a meditation for around 20 minutes. And part of that meditation is just kind of grounding down into your existence here on the planet, this rock hurling through space, which is like something that was really powerful, right? Like we kind of wake up in the morning and throw away the sheets and we're like, gotta go. But like, do you ever think about just like the bones in your body? It's like wild, right? Like everything that's happening in your body. And oftentimes that can take you out. Like you might be really stressed about something or you remember that. Like, I'm just like this is profound, this body that I'm in, and I'm sitting here on a rock. So you start there, and then there's a visualization process, and that's basically it. But it's 90 days. So. And
what was the visualization process?
Yeah, it's a sequence. So I did this through a guide, sacredjourney.earth. Is a friend of a friend started this. And so, yeah, we put together a visualization that sort of encompassed what each person would describe as like the pillars of their life. It might be, this is kind of how you want to feel about your relationships. This is how you want to feel about your passions. This is how you want to feel about your finances, your family, your community. And so you kind of have these different pillars. It's less about the things that you want. It's less about the like, I want to have this big house, or I want to make $1 billion, or I want this or that. It's more about like, how do you want to feel about those things? Because that's all that matters, right? Like you think that getting the $1 billion house will make you feel content or happy or proud or loved, whatever. Maybe it will, but it's actually the other way around. Like go after the feeling first, and then wherever life takes you, accept that. Because if that gets you to the feeling, that's all that matters. And that might be you only make $20,000 a year, but somehow you find yourself traveling the world on a sailboat, and that turns out to be exactly what you wanted, and you're happy. And that's the accomplishment, right? So every area of your life, you're kind of like mapping out and thinking of like imagery that kind of conjures up that feeling. And so you get really good at using visuals, not just for seeing, but for feeling. And like, I just remember maybe like a couple weeks in, just being able to feel emotion just off of thought, like so quickly, and like seeing this image and just being like feeling it vibrate through my body, feeling the joy of like giving my parents a hug after this accomplishment, you know, those types of things. And I think it's a really whether you believe in visualization or manifestation, it's a really powerful skill to have.
Yeah. And it also just allows you to enjoy it now rather than waiting 10 years with the hope that you're going to get that feeling.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people wake up and they get right into the day because they're outrunning a bad feeling.
Right.
Like, I've felt this for sure. If I wake up and I'm a little down, like a little low, a little sluggish, I'm like, I want to outrun this feeling and get straight into accomplish, because it's just going to make me not have to deal with that. But to get good at feeling the sticky feelings in the morning, and then consciously realizing that you can evoke a better feeling through visualization or through thought, I think allows you to feel that more often. And there is really something to how much visualization allows you to recognize those opportunities when they come about.
Yeah, I mean, there's science now too. So there's the recognizing the opportunities. Like I'm a big believer in that, and I think it's pretty obvious that if you know what you're looking for, like you'll see it more often. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are like conjuring in those things. It's just that like you're noticing, and because you know what you want to notice. And then the visualization thing for like performance is like seen all throughout peak performance. Like pretty much every athlete, you know, whether they even do it or know it or not, like they're doing, like some people are stronger, some people are faster, some people are more calm, some people are energized, some people are really good naturally at visualization. It's a skill, it's a muscle. And the best athletes in the world, they talk about that. They're like, I've been here before. Like they're on the podium, they're holding the trophy. They're like, I saw this in my head 1,000,000 times, and I'm ready for it. I'm not surprised really. You know what I mean? And that's, I think it's really powerful, because what I've noticed that when I first started the visualization process and first really articulated how do I want to feel about things, you're confronted with a lot of like you're probably not going to do that. Like, I don't think you're going to ever feel that way. That's not possible. And that's just there all the time. Like, fuck, like face that. And over time you start to like dance with that, and you start to you're like, actually I can, like, and you start to believe. And I remember one of the practices they had us do was not just write it down and think about it and visualize it, but to read it out loud to yourself in the mirror. And like, it's pretty interesting what comes up, because a lot of that like suppressed disbelief and doubt will start to come up, and you're just like, you're like, whoa, like this really
how
powerful.
Much for you? I write best when I'm angry. I write best when I'm like, nah, fuck that shit. And I'll have these bursts that I'm like, that was good. And there's just this point where it's not harmonic. It's not loving. It's like the emotion I feel is annoyance and anger. And I'm like, no, fuck that doubt. I'm going to dunk on you. And I was watching the Last Dance, the Michael Jordan doc, and that dude still is annoyed. Yeah. He's annoyed. He's angry. How much of you dealing with self-doubt has to do with a feeling of like, nah, fuck that shit?
Yeah. And well, first I would probably also ask, like, are we just better at expressing ourselves through anger than expressing ourselves through positive emotions? And so we think that anger is key to our creativity and to our like highest expression. Like, you know, you hear like comics talk about that.
Yeah,
Well,
there's
I don't want to get in shape. You know, like,
yeah.
I'm gonna lose my fucking.
Well, there's a lot of energy that comes from anger.
There's a lot of energy that comes from both, though, right? But I think that it's easier. I don't know if it's easier. It's like it seems more culturally normal to to feel those types of like negative emotions. So it's like that's the easiest path to get that creativity, because the creative output feels good. Once it's out there, you're like, hell yeah.
Yeah, and
whether I used anger or love to create it or not.
I find that anger gets me over the hump, and then I can sometimes get into a creative flow where it just feels like this is the shit.
Yeah, and by the way, I totally agree. Like I create from a place of suffering a lot of times, and it sucks. Like I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Like I will, if I see a problem in front of me, it could be a problem that I define as though like I just really want to paint this certain thing, or it's a problem with business of like we need to solve this problem. I adopt that as sort of a life or death thing, and I don't know why, and it's not really conscious, but my history, anything I've ever done in my life, like kind of doesn't really matter anymore. It's all about this thing, and if I fail at this thing, I'm like nothing. It's like this feeling of like precarious potential despair, and it's kind of, and like I'll almost like self-loathe myself until I complete it, and it drives me because I'm like, I'm not gonna fucking like die. And then I get through it, and I'm like, I'm more relieved than anything, but the output is good because it came from that energy of like, it's intense energy. And a lot of artists create from that point. Like you look at history, whether it's musicians or painters, Edgar Allan Poe, like it's everywhere. You see similar things where they're driven by this kind of dark force, and it creates amazing things. But what I was going for with that question is I've just thought a lot about that, because I'm like, I don't want to feel that way every time I create, you know what I mean? And I just wonder if it's a learned skill again, and is it like a factor of our culture also, right? And can we use positive energy to create amazing things too? And I think you can. But yeah, that anger really gets you going.
How have you been trying to transition those thought patterns? Do you have any kind of mantra or any kind of thought? If you're like, this is a problem, I now feel angry and insufficient and so fired up, but I know this isn't necessarily healthy because there's a lot of self-loathing that's coming in with this problem solving. Have you been able to be like, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself?
Yeah, I've definitely muttered those words to myself.
You have?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but not like, this is going to solve the problem. Just like I just needed to. I don't know, it's hard. It's interesting because it's in some ways it feels bad for me, and in some ways it feels good for me. You know, it drives me, and the result has been like a lot of things that I'm proud of. But it's not a good experience a lot of the time. So yeah, I mean, it's like, it's the same thing with the comedian who feels like he doesn't want to lose weight because he doesn't want to lose his like mojo or whatever, stop being funny. It's like, I don't know if I want to lose the self-loathing because I might stop being creative or stop being productive. And I don't necessarily think that's true. And so like right now I'm in the exploratory phase of like, how can I, channel a different energy and get, the same amount of drive and output, and enjoy a whole journey. Instead of right now, I kind of enjoy getting to those destinations over and over again. I completed the project, I did the thing, etc.
How much has journaling played a part in changing those thought patterns?
I think so. I'm still like, journaling is I have an interesting relationship with journaling. It doesn't come easy to me. It's like a nutrient that like when you intake it, you're not like, you don't feel like a changed person, but when you don't have it, you're starving.
You feel like you have scurvy.
You're malnourished. Yeah, exactly.
Spiritual scurvy.
So those things are super tough because you you'll do it you'll get into a routine and you're like, I feel great. And you're like, I don't need it anymore. And then all of a sudden you don't feel good. It's like air, right? Like you don't really recognize you don't really recognize it until it's gone. But yes, like journaling has been one of those tools that's allowed me to explore this conversation around like, can I create from a place of love? And also minimize the downside. It helps me kind of like channel it and accept it and not let it like get out of control. Journaling, I spoke about this before, like journaling is very similar to like tending to your garden, you know, and if you don't tend to it for a long time, like the weeds grow and the plants that you want start to struggle and the good things start to struggle. So like you got to go and tend to that from time to time. And ideally, it should be a daily practice. And so for me, I do feel a night and day difference in terms of how I like spiral out of control in negative directions, potentially how I misinterpret things and start to build negative patterns and, you know, stories and all of those things. When I put it down on paper, I really do see it. It's free therapy, right? I've had a coach for quite a while. Love him. I've had other coaches, females. They're all great, but the like 80% of the value I've gotten is just me sharing what I'm going through to the other person. By the time it leaves my lips, oftentimes I'm like, oh, I get it. Like that was all I needed to do was just tell someone. And with a journal, you don't necessarily have to pay for a therapist. You just throw it down on paper and you have the same effect.
Why do you journal about the day before?
So there's two reasons. One, it's just a really good icebreaker. I think that sometimes when you open up the blank pages of a journal, you're just like, what do I write about? It's really easy just to start with something. And I actually like that. I feel like it's like a deposit in the piggy bank of history where like years from now you can reflect back on it. And I think that'll be a special thing that we can't really feel what that's going to feel like 30 years from now. But I think it'll be pretty magical to have these kind of diaries of what went down the day before. But back to the first point, it's a great entry point, right? Like you can start writing about this happened, that happened, that happened. And before you know it, you're kind of making, you know, alterations to the story. And then you start to notice, oh, that was just like my interpretation or that was assumption I made about that thing that happened. And so it can be these nice like gateways into more, you know, esoteric or like deeper thought, therapeutic thought. So that's why I start with, this is really boring but easy. It's accessible. This is what happened. This. And then it kind of goes into other areas.
Why do you think competition is for losers?
Ooh. So I mean, I didn't invent this. The phrase competition is for losers, I believe, was first at least popularized by someone named Peter Thiel, who's, you know, famously known for being like a founder of PayPal and eBay and now like one of the most respected investors ever. And he wrote a book called 0 to 1 that's on starting a business. And I think what's unique about this book is it doesn't talk about anything that's in business books, like how to find your first lead and, you know, 10 steps to building a brand. It's all of these deeper, thought-provoking topics. And one of the chapters is competition is for losers. And he does a lot of talks on this. And the concept is most of the big businesses in the world are actually started from a place of like seeking less competition. When you think about a lot of people who start businesses, they see someone doing something, they see an industry, they see a new trend, and they're like, there's money, there's dollar signs here, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to be the best, I'm going to, you know, beat everyone else, right? It's super common. And the notion of like a monopoly is kind of like taboo, but most successful businesses like the Amazons, the Googles, the Apples, they built essentially monopolies, which just means that you have like a large portion of the market under your control. Like there's no competition essentially. And what's unique about those businesses that approached it from that way, that is counterintuitive is they didn't look at big markets because they were so competitive. They were like, where can we not compete and sort of guarantee an easier path to a win? So with Facebook, for example, they, at the time, there's like MySpace, and they're fighting with Friendster, who's going to be the best big social media conglomerate. Facebook's like Harvard University. Within 90 days, they had, the majority of the whole school using their product. From there, they were able to expand concentrically out to other colleges. They created all this hype, and everybody loved it. And then they took over. With the case of Amazon, they started out as just a bookstore. Nobody cared, like nobody was looking at that space. People wanted to build the online, like everything, from the start. And they're like, we're going to go here and we're going to be the number one bookstore online. And they didn't have competition. And so they did that. And then from there, they started to build out from that. And what they realized is like the people who buy books online are literate. They're also competent online, comfortable with it. And because of that, they're probably correlated to, they might have more money, spending power, etc. And so having that data allowed them to expand concentrically and offer more goods and products. And eventually, now they have like a monopoly on all online. And so it's just an interesting idea of like looking for areas that other people aren't looking to win. And I started to think more about this. This isn't really in his book, but taking it outside of the business context. And, you just mentioned Last Dance, like someone like Michael Jordan. He's actually investing. He doesn't invest time trying to compete. He's investing time off the court to try to make things less competitive. He's doing everything he can off the court to walk onto the court and like it's no competition anymore. He doesn't want it competitive. He wants to win, but he doesn't want it competitive at all. And I think there's just like an interesting concept that like traverses pretty much all peak performers is they do the extra things to make it less competitive, right? And a pretty cool example within the basketball world is Stephen Curry. If he tried to play the game like everyone else, which at the time was less emphasized around like the 3-point line. He's 6'2", shorter point guard, not as strong. He's not that fast. He's not that athletic. And so he focused on shooting 3-pointers and becoming an amazing dribbler, and other things too. But like he put an insane amount of time in 3-pointers. And that was an area that wasn't like, it's not even competitive. Like he is a head and shoulders above, and now he's like known as one of the best players of all time because he found this niche and invested in that, whereas a lot of players maybe invested elsewhere. And I think one other example that I think is cool is someone like Alex Honnold. So, he's the free soloist. He'll be the first to say that he's not the strongest climber, he's not the fastest climber, he's not the best for sure. And as he was growing up, he could have easily been like, the path that climbers take is they go and they try to, compete in Olympics, or they try to, I guess the Olympics is pretty new, but they'll try to compete in like the USA Nationals, speed climbing or bouldering or whatever. And if he would have done that, like maybe he would have done all right, but he wasn't like the best of the best. But internally, he was more drawn to free soloing. And in hindsight, we're like, that's the obvious path for him. Look at how successful he was, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, no, at the time, that was not intuitive at all. Nobody gave a shit about free soloing. And he went head in on that path, and a path where there's no competition, and, carved a whole, universe for himself. And so I'm just constantly thinking about that within the context of our business, but also like in my life. But like with our business, I'm like, there's a lot of areas within brand building, within company building, that are overlooked because people are just busy looking over their shoulders at everyone else instead of like looking what is like inherently special to you and doing that with courage, because it takes courage because no one else is really doing it. So you're like, I don't know if this is going to work. But oftentimes it's those investments and things that people aren't doing where you win. Like you're the best at that because no one else even thought to try. And then if you can stack those up across a bunch of different things, in the aggregate, you're like you're so dynamic. Like somebody can't come in and copy you. They can't come in and copy one thing and compete, because you're like, we're spread out everywhere.
What are examples of decisions you've made at Mudwater to be less competitive?
Yeah, I mean, the first might be like our name. I don't think, a traditional business person would be like, like you're making something that people consume and drink. Like, I'm like, yeah, like I'm going to call it mud. Like, people are going to think that that's gross. Like, some probably will. But yeah, I think that's I like that. Like it's inspiring curiosity. And I can build a brand around that very notion, where it's like, you're not drinking words. You're not drinking print on a package. Like, the word of the company name doesn't mean shit. And, I started to like extrapolate that out to like, you have like Mountain Dews and Sunny Delight, and it's like shitty, like literally toxic to your body. But it sounds really good. It sounds nice and dewy. So that's like the first example. But I try to, it's not just doing it everywhere for, the sake of doing it, but I think you start to find some things similar to Alex Honnold that just came easy to me. It's like water, and I normally wouldn't, or like a normal person might be like, well, no one's doing that, so I'm not going to do that. But like, I'm going to do that because it's kind of a superpower for me. And so early on, it was like writing. I'm not a traditionally trained good writer. I'm not like you, Kyle. But
I'm not a traditionally trained writer.
Yeah, but like you're an amazing writer.
I take offense to that.
I'll put it this way. I don't have good grammar.
I spell
Y-A.
I know. I've told you that many times. And then other people at the company were starting to do it. And I was like, we need to stop this right now. This is a fucking cancer.
Yeah.
It's a cancer.
But like, I was comfortable expressing myself through word in like kind of like a unique way. And so when I started to make Instagram posts or ads, I looked around, like other companies, not necessarily, there wasn't a lot of competitors in our space, but when you're looking at any brand, they post a photo of their product, and it's, energy, it's just the value props, and they're just driving it down your throat. Sale today, 20% off. It's like there's no humanness to it. There's no personality. There's no story. There's no narrative. There's nothing. There's no depth. And so I just started to write these just like 3 paragraphs, like it's a complete zig where other people are zagging. And again, like the traditional, if you were to Google how to write copy for an ad, like here's the 10 things you need to do, it wouldn't have said that.
Yeah, they'd say people have short attention spans.
Put the value props right front and center, all caps if you can, blah, 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 blah. And so you look around, everyone's doing that. And what do you do as a consumer? You see instantly that's an ad, and you assume instantly that there's no real person behind it. They just want your money, blah, 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 blah. And so for me, it was like, just going to be honest. Like, why not? Like, literally, why not? Like, I'm a person, I just started this company. I was drinking this for myself for a couple of years, and I decided to share it with other people, like literally that, but kind of extrapolate it out a little more. But that was it. It wasn't like this interesting, crazy thing that happened. I was just being real. And people resonated with that. I think we had like the best ads for a while. And it wasn't because it cost more money. Like, I was literally shooting them on my iPhone before going to work. Like every ad, every social media post, I was like, I should post something today. I'm going to take a photo of this. The first thing I do when I got to work was like type up the caption, just send it. But I was like, everything I post needs to be thoughtful. And if I do that over time, we get known for having, there's humans behind this brand. And the other brand that's been posting these like quick little things over time, it's really hard to recover from that, because it sounds authentic. Like when you're trying to do it, it's inherently unauthentic because you're trying to do it. Like authenticity is kind of like, it just happens, right?
Yeah. And and you have something to say, and I have something to say, and you hired me to be the copywriter and sort of just said go. And I come from an activism background. Somebody would be like, motherfuckers are trying to keep us down. And you're like, this is awesome.
We had to set some guardrails early on a little bit, but yeah.
But hardly. I think that...
I mean, I don't even...
I haven't even looked in a while. How you doing? But I see it as a way for me to express things that I believe, and copywriting is just another form of storytelling. At the end of the story, there's, hey, we make this product, but I think that often you can get people to get really interested and engaged in a story and have it be real, and you can tell jokes and you can take people on a journey that they really appreciate. And they're going to be more likely to buy your product at the end. That's something that's really changed for me over the last year and a half of working here, because before I was very much outside of the system, and I was afraid that I was going to be creatively confined and turned into this vanilla default mode, version of myself. Yeah. And it's incorrect. It's totally untrue. I've created some of the best work of my life in the last year and a half because of confines and because of needing to work.
Creative restraints are fuel for creativity in many ways.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And it's something that it's a message that I want to get out there to people, because I think that there are a lot of creatives who are afraid to work within certain confines of a company. But
it's a misperception.
If you can dance with that, and you can recognize, okay, here are some things that there's some guardrails, some areas that I can't go. That tension births better ideas. But without that, you're punching at a hologram. There's nothing to be pushing against. And that's been the biggest lesson I've learned since working at this company.
Yeah. I mean, I had similar fears, and I think to this day, I'm like, I want to make sure we're building this company in a way that I want to work here. It's kind of as simple as that. Like, I've worked at other companies, and I know what it can feel like. I remember right when I got out of college, I was really, I went to school for design, and I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I like all these brands in the surf industry. I like this one brand. I'm not going to mention their name, but my friend was a surfer and rode for them. He's like, you can come by the office. I'm like, what? No way. I love this brand, everything that they put out, everything they look like they stood for and everything. So he took me to the office in Costa Mesa, and, we're driving. I'm so excited. I'm like, what's this place going to be like? It's going to be crazy. Their brand was just so expressive and had so much to say and feeling and everything. And we just drive into this office park. I'm like, what? There's no, it's just unit A, B. It's like, oh, it's right here, unit C. And we just get out of the car and walk in, and it's just fluorescent lights and cubicles. And I'm like, I was gutted. I was like, whoa, it's just a facade. And it really was an impactful experience for me, because it doesn't have to be that way. And when you really think about it, it's we're investing so much of our time and energy and gifts working here, and working everybody who works. It's the percentage of your life. It's significant, and because of that, it's affecting not finances is the obvious thing. You're I'm working to make money so I can do the things in my life. But because you're spending so much time there, it's also affecting your physical health. It's definitely affecting your mental and emotional health, It's everything from sleep to stress and all those things. It's just that most companies don't really focus on how they're contributing to your the whole spectrum, the holistic impact. And I think it's a big miss. And what I've noticed as I've been building this company is one of the beautiful things about building a team is there's not a lot of things in modern life that simulate a lot of the beautiful things that tribes had, right? Where within a tribe, it's you have a group of people, and they all have sort of complementary skill sets. There's the hunters, the gatherers, there's the music, there's the shamans, there's the chief. Everybody has a place and a purpose, but it's all aligned and they all are connected. And very similarly, when you're building a company, it can feel that way, where you have different people with different skill sets, but they all work together, and you need every one of them to actually do what you're trying to do, and everybody's aligned with a common purpose. And hopefully that purpose is good, right? And I think back to your like activism work, like businesses are probably like the most change-making things on our planet. And sadly, the proof is when you look at the negative change that they make on our environment, on society, on just everything, right? You like that's through business, yeah. and it gets a really bad name because of that. But I think the thing to focus on as well is just the power in that. Like, whoa, it can literally transform the planet. Like misguided capitalism and energy production can literally destroy the planet. That speaks to the power.
Yeah.
So what can it do if it's channeled in a different direction?
Well, in addition to that, your employer is largely responsible for your mental health, because so much of your day is inside the culture of the business. Yeah. It's largely determining how your mental state is. So engineering that in an intentional way, not only does business have a huge impact on the planet, but it has a huge impact on your mind and your soul.
Yeah. Yeah, but so you see like the impact of sort of misguided incentives in capitalism and how it can destroy the planet. But I would say that the same power can also reverse it. It's just that the incentives and the businesses would have to be created to do so, and that's kind of the tricky part. But like more and more you're seeing companies that are seeing that potential impact, and you got B Corps and all these other things that, you know, it's slow, but it's happening. And you got the Patagonias, and like Patagonia, for example, like when right now it's like you don't really realize the impact they had on the industry of like clothing and apparel, but like when they were starting, like nobody cared about where your clothes came from because there wasn't options to care. Like there wasn't choices, and there wasn't choices because people didn't go out and make them, and people didn't go out and make them because there wasn't people demanding them, but people weren't demanding them because there wasn't choices. So it's like this chicken before the egg thing. And it took a company like Patagonia to be like, we're going to create the choice before there's even the demand for it. And then once the choice was there, the demand grew, and then all these other companies, it just became like table stakes. Like there's a lot of companies that don't give a shit still, but there's so many more companies now that's like, it's organic cotton. This is where it's grown. This is why it matters. And that's all because of, you know, kind of like one or handfuls of companies that were like, we don't care that people don't care about this yet, because we're going to create the future that we want to exist in a better future. And that's going to take some risks. It's going to take some creative courage. It's going to take a lot of vision. And that really inspires me. And I think about that for us too. And, you know, we're much smaller than Patagonia is. We're much younger too, right? We're 4 years in. And I think if we lay the groundwork for that foundation now, in the long term, we can make a big impact. And where I'm looking to make that impact is in the mental health side. Like where Patagonia was like looking to save the planet, like we're looking to save the mind. And, you know, our current efforts and that are in alignment with that is kind of around psychedelics and kind of breaking down the taboos. Again, it's kind of similar to Patagonia. It's like there was suppression of these compounds and these therapies and these, you know, practices. And so the demand for it completely dropped. But like people have to create the choice and the option to do it. And then you're going to see the demand for it come back. And I think a lot of healing take place after. So yeah, I'm passionate about I'm conscious of the negative impact that companies can have on the world, but I'm also passionate about the power that it proves, because that means it could be channeled towards positivity too.
So Patagonia, some people might know, just Yvonne set up a way to have trust for the profits of the company to move in perpetuity. So their whole tagline was like, the earth is our only shareholder.
So cool.
Super cool. And they did that too. You brought up organic cotton. It's a good example, because they were doing organic cotton before just about everyone else. And it was at this time when people
it wasn't like they went to a whiteboard and they're like, so if we do organic cotton, we're going to get X amount more users in dollars. And they're like, nobody asked for it really because it's just not out there. But once we create it, people ask for it. And once that happens, we're going to create a better world.
Right.
Yeah.
It's okay if you don't want to talk about it, but are you willing to talk about the structure of Mudwater with like B Corps and with investment? This is above my pay grade, but how does that all work when trying to make good decisions?
Yeah. There's not really anything conflicting in regards to that. We're currently in the B Corp process, and the B Corp process is no joke. It's thorough, it's robust. If you're a B Corp, it's legit. Like you're definitely in the top 1% of planets that are, of businesses that are, doing things progressively, and when it comes to and it spans from like environmental through to like how you treat employees too. So we're working through that process, and it takes a while for the approval process to go down, but we're working through it. Our investors are great. They're, we don't have pressure to like do or don't do things. I think they're understanding in building brands, which is really important through the process of raising capital, was finding people who understood the type of brand we wanted to build and the type of impact we had on the world. They care about like the size of the business, the value of their investment, but they're aligned that the value of their investment is going to increase by doing, these types of like moves and these types of investments on our side. So it's been a really surprisingly smooth process, because you typically hear like the horror stories with investors, but we're grateful to have really good relationship with them.
Last time we did a podcast, I think that there were 7 employees at Mudwater.
Yeah, I think.
And now there are 30.
Yeah.
What what questions do you ask yourself when hiring someone? What are you looking for? Because a lot of the time that I see you spending right now is bringing the right people into the company. And this is obviously dependent on what position you're hiring for. But if someone were, at their own company and they're hiring, what are frameworks or questions to ask yourself, or advice to give them at a growing company?
Yeah, I think so. If you're a founder, one of the biggest transitions you'll make is going from this transition of where your job is to build the company, and shifting to your job being to find the people that build the company, which is like a very interesting thing to do. And in that transition, like you're relieving yourself of of a lot of responsibilities, and you're finding people like better than you at everything, and that's your job. And in that process, I've learned a lot. We have 30 employees, but we also have like 20, 30 contractors too. There's like a lot of people in our ecosystem. And one of the things early on that I learned was the importance of focusing on the need, like essentially starting with why. Why do we need this role? The mistake that I've made, and I've seen a lot of people make, is they become focused on talent first. Where it's like, this person's really talented, we'll make a role for them. And it can be done, but it's typically really tricky, especially in a resource-strapped, like where you're moving really quick environment, for someone to walk in and not have like a really clear landing spot and super clear directives around how to be successful. Like, what are they supposed to do? And so we've spun our wheels a bit with some hires early on, and maybe do that, like really talented people, but like they're not activated, right? And so now we apply this methodology of like, you got to start role first. Like what are you hiring for? Why? Like, what are they not doing? Like, what are they not going to be responsible for? And then of course, like, what are they going to be the master? Like, what are they going to own? And then from there, you go and find the best person in the world to sit in that seat. But you got to define the position, right? Like if you're a basketball coach and you're just like hiring talent and all of a sudden your team is all 6'1" or your team's all centers, like it's not going to be a good team. So you're like, we need a point guard, we need a small forward. And so similar for us, it's like define the role. And I say that probably sounds obvious, but like underline that, like go deep in that. Because when you're moving fast and you're excited and you're like, we're going to hire like an amazing person, they're just going to, run this department, whatever. It's not specific enough. Like you need to almost simulate what it's going to be like when they're there and what's going to come up and kind of get out ahead of it. Again, visualization, a great way where that can come into play. This is what I'm feeling out like how it's going to be when we're in this meeting discussing this kind of a project or that kind of a project. And that can be really helpful in determining what type of experience you might need. Like maybe they need agency experience, or maybe you need them to have startup experience because that means they're scrappy and they can do a lot with a small team, because there's a lot of differences. Some people can be amazing and experienced, but they're used to managing a 20-person department. And that's just not, it's not going to translate well to a smaller startup, right?
You recommended the book A Year Without Pants to me, which is all about Automatic and WordPress and the work culture of WordPress. Mm-hmm. And that was one thing that the author said in that book, is that they would go really narrow and deep, and they would have these specialists in various roles who would be by far the best at that one thing. But if you get enough of them, it tends to work out.
Yeah, and I think early on, you just simply can't do that, right? Because when you first start, it's a lot of times just one person. Like it was just me for, I had help on the supply chain, but as far as like, the customer support, the digital product, like all of those things, it was just me, and I couldn't afford anything else. And so you either have a choice. You're going to bring on a co-founder and just split up ownership of the company, but like can't pay each other. Or you just grind it out and then raise money and start to build a team. But even once you build a team early on, you got to be like, a lot of people build a team, and they look around and like a team looks like this. There's the lead, then there's the manager, or there's the director, then there's the manager, then there's a report. And it's like early on, you just can't do that. Like you need Swiss Army knives early on, but then as a company grows, you need specialists. And so there's a transition that happens, and early employees need to cross that chasm and almost like acquire a new skill set, a new way of being. And then later stage, then you are like, we need less broad Swiss Army knives. We need like the best person in the world to run this. And that takes a lot of forethought to find.
I just mentioned Automatic, which is a remote company.
Mm-hmm. They kind of laid the groundwork for it, yeah.
Did they? Were they one of the early ones?
One of the early ones, yeah. They were definitely the highest profile early ones.
Were there any companies like Automatic that you gained inspiration from early on?
I mean, as it relates to work culture, Patagonia was obviously a big influence. I was working in Silicon Valley for a while, and you're exposed to like startups. They're trying to compete to get talent, and they're kind of going like they're making big moves, in a variety of directions. Some people are investing in their office and making it like have everything. It's got daycare, it's got gyms, it's got, different food options. Like you don't need to even leave the place. And then there's some companies like Automatic, they're like, don't even come. Like, we don't want you here, just work from wherever you thrive. And I tended to resonate with that model a little bit more. I loved the freedom, and, I think there's value in both. Like now growing this company and having worked in both an office where I had to be there every single day, commuting 2 hours each direction to go to work and like hating life, to working in an all remote team for a while. And it's like you don't need either all the time. There's value in being face to face sometimes, but like you don't need that every single day. And so I think a more nuanced approach, you know, in most things in life is typically always the right answer. It's just that the easiest answer is like this blanket binary approach. And so what I think we're trying to develop here and explore is there, or like we're trying to kind of create that nuanced approach. Like this space is not, it's an office, but I view it almost as like a co-working space for our team. If you live here, like you might work here a couple times a week. If you don't live here, you might fly out here and work here a couple times a month or a couple times a year, but you don't have to. It's only if it's bringing value. And we'll definitely have offsites here where we'll fly the whole team in for like, you know, to connect. But what I like about it is we can do things like this, you know. And
I like it very much.
Yeah,
Shane.
And next week we're having people fly in. We're doing like a leadership offsite, and so it's a little home base for us. But it's, you know, it's not. I don't feel like it's constricting in the same way.
For people who don't know, what is this place?
This place.
It's a big investment. You're putting your chips down on this space.
Yeah.
And for a remote first company,
yeah,
investing in this kind of space is a big decision. So
decision.
What led you to make this decision, and what is this place?
Yeah. So first of all, this place we're referring to a large raw warehouse type
We're in
space.
Kyle's RV right now.
Yeah.
Shane bought it off of Kyle. It was a 97 Ford Starflight, and it's
mobile.
now the co-working space of
You don't
Mud
have to come to
WTR.
the office comes to you.
Yeah. I just drive the RV to various employees' houses.
Yeah,
What's
this
up,
is
guys?
where the office is going to be parked today.
Yeah.
Come on by.
By the way, do you have any oil?
So we're on Main Street here in Santa Monica, and we have this big raw kind of industrial warehouse space that we're building out. The idea for this started, it started early on. Like I knew eventually that our company, we sell a physical product. We're 90%, 99% online right now. But we're a physical product that's experienced in the physical world. So it only makes sense to at some point go and show up there, right? Like we are a human brand after all. I didn't know exactly when we'd do it, but last year I started talking about 3 things. The first is I want people to be able to try mud in the physical world, and start off small scale. It could look like a variety of things. It could be like we have a food truck and we're selling it on Abbot Kinney. It could mean we have a little pop-up somewhere, or it could mean we build like a proper cafe. The second thing was at that time we were hosting breathwork events. I think we were doing it once a month on the beach, and there was like 100 people coming, and there was little promotion. It was just like this low lift, but really amazing community building. And so I'm like, I want to, double down there. So again, cafe, try mud in the wild, bringing about this experiential element of our brand. And then the third is we had this growing team. We had, I think, 8 employees that happened to live in LA, and the majority of them happened to be on our creative team. And I found that we were like on these Zoom calls, we were like a mile away from each other, and we're talking about these really fun creative concepts. And creativity, like creative ideas, tends to be one of the things that I think thrives within in-person conversation, where you're feeling people's emotions.
For sure.
Like an idea is a pretty personal thing. It's a pretty fragile thing.
It's very fragile.
And
it's fragile. It's ephemeral. It can kind of go away, and
like passing that through a microphone through Zoom can kind of feel like it just got lost in the ether.
Well, being on Zoom calls feels like you're bombing on stage.
It does, right? Everybody's on
because
mute.
You'll say, "Hey guys, so I think that
half the
future,
half the people don't even have their camera on."
Exactly. So you say this creative idea that's vulnerable and could be weird and off the wall, and then there's just this.
Yeah, you can only see like half the room.
Long pause.
And so.
And it doesn't. It is like this very.
And it could have
young
it could have landed in an amazing way, but you'd never know it.
Totally, it could have landed in an amazing way, but because of that delay, and usually the idea when you get into a creative room, you bring 2 or 3 creative people into a room, it's not just one idea that comes through and hits, it's a riff and iterations off of that idea. Right. And if you get the right people in the room, you can land on a great product very quickly, but it still
takes like a little ping pong.
It takes that riff. And I agree. I think that doing it in person is massively productive.
Yeah, it's ideal. And the same thing goes for, you know, big planning, like quarterly planning, annual planning, those types of meetings where there's a lot of, you know, it really is like kind of creative ideas. It's creative solutions. It's not like the same thing as like coming up with like an ad, but it's like a new way of modeling something, a new way of approaching this business. And creativity thrives off of safety and feedback, right? And with online Zoom, you kind of are like dampening both, because you don't really know how people are reacting. You tend to not really feel safe. It's kind of this like void or vacuum that you're just throwing things into, and you're pushed to make assumptions, and hopefully you're good at making positive assumptions about what you're doing. But I think at the end of the day, it's never going to be like as accurate as what you get in real-time feedback.
Yeah, there's a lot more goodwill in person. When I'm on a remote call pitching a creative idea, at least 20% of my brain is devoted to the idea that they hate me. So that means that there's 20% up for grabs right there that could go straight back into the idea. I mean, I had this with freaking Dursu, our VP of creative, yesterday. We went out and we had breakfast together, and I was like, you like me. Yeah. And I like you. And we had this like laugh. We're like, the fucking stories you can tell over remote are just vicious.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like a lot of things, right? When you make these shifts, sometimes you can overcorrect, and like it's like the pendulum swings. It's like working in person sucks. All remote. And then you're like, all remote sucks. And then instead of making the nuanced approach, you just go to the other side and you're like, well, try that. And then you're like, well, I feel constrained and like frustrated and burnt out, you know? So finding a balance is, I think, what we're shooting for.
Yeah. I mean, if you're locked in a small conference room with the same people over and over again, or, you know, trapped on a boat for 12 days, you're like, fuck, get me out of here. You know, there are little moments where you're like, I just need to be alone for me to recenter. So I do agree with you. It's not one or the other. Yeah.
And I've been finding that a lot of my role is like ensuring that we're not overcorrecting. It's less about making the actual thing or decision. It's like, as long as the why, I'm not as worried about the what we do. It's like, as long as the why and how is not this like overcorrection on our core principles and values. And I back that. And like this space is kind of like this macro expression of that. It's like, we're not gonna, everybody can work from wherever they thrive, like period, end of story. There's benefits in coming in and working here sometimes also, and you don't have to, but come and try it. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think as a CEO? It's funny because, you know, like we just went on a trip together, and you were very much, we were just hanging, and you're my bud. And then you get back into this CEO role. And it's sometimes almost like a mental schism in my mind where I'm like, oh, it's just Shane. But then I'm like, fuck, it's Shane the CEO. And that's just a crazy amount of responsibility. And it's just a weird job. Like being a CEO is it's a weird job. Yeah. What do you think is your biggest weakness as a CEO? And then I'm going to get to the strength.
The biggest weakness. I mean, there's a couple of things that I'm working on. The obvious one is like balance. And the things that I'm working on are things that like just don't come naturally to me. And one of them is balance. One of them is acknowledgement, both others and to self. And the third is adjusting to, you know, that concept of building the company versus finding the people that build the company, building the team that builds the company type of a thing. It's a big transition for me. And I'll start with the balance thing. I'm very driven, and as I talked about earlier, it's like I actually look for problems to solve. I'm like addicted to that tidal shift. I just accomplished something, feel like really good about it. Cool, like what else is wrong? I want to go solve that, and then I go right back into that zone of like, oh fuck, whatever I did before doesn't matter. Like I gotta fix this thing, and I gotta do it like the best in the world. And over time that can be exhausting to myself, but also to like people around me, I think. And so I'm learning to, how do I taper that? How do I harness that? Because it's definitely a double-edged sword. It's a superpower of mine. Maybe it's not. I'm gonna allow both edges to exist. It's more like I'm building the handle so I can like yield the sword, instead of right now I'm just kind of like clumsily picking it up and cutting myself, and pull it out when I need to. So that's one thing. The juicy one is probably this acknowledgement thing. It's probably connected in some way. I get so sucked into the solving the problem and making the thing and doing the thing and thinking about it forever, and also once it's done, just going right to the next one, that I don't celebrate and I don't acknowledge. And that starts with myself. Like I don't do it to myself.
Yeah.
And so I definitely struggle to do it for other people. Well, what's so funny?
I've had to tell people, like, people think you hate them. So, and I have to tell them.
It's fucked up, dude.
I have to tell them, no, he's just thinking like 5 years ahead. Because that's happened for our relationship. Sometimes I'm like, Shane, do you hate me right now? And it's taken me like years to be like, no, this is actually just him so intensely focused on the problem.
I get so.
And you have the biggest fucking heart and you have so much love to give.
Yeah,
but there's this burn period. And I feel like I have to be like your security guard, like emotional security guard.
Yeah.
Like, I want you to know.
You're my interpreter.
I'm your
You're
interpreter.
Like doing like a sign language.
Dude,
that actually means he loves you.
Yeah, he loves you. And he's going to put you in this position that is going to make you thrive and feel so in touch with your potential. Yeah. And you just need to trust that he's just thinking about something else.
Yeah.
And it's great, man. I love you for it. I love you for it.
And that's one of my strengths too, right? Is this like deep, like I'll dive in deep.
Yeah.
And sort of like nothing else really exists or matters at that point. Because again, it's almost like this feeling like my whole existence is on the line. So it's like, I'm going to figure this out.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't have time for small talk. But it's something that I want to manage, because it also, it impacts other people and it impacts myself too. Like it's not the most, it's not the funnest way to live. And as I've read more about and looked at other CEOs and other successful founders who've had exits, and they kind of struggle with similar things in a way. And like one of the things you'll find and you'll see across a lot of successful founders is like, they'll say like, I sold the business and it was like the worst day of my life. I lost my purpose. I lost all these things. And it's like they were more interested in the doing all the time, and that's where they got the satisfaction, not the outcome. And you hear it in like athletics too. Like I won. Like I'm champion, and I don't feel any different. I thought everything was going to be fixed. And so it's been an interesting reflection around acknowledgement and celebration. And it's like, celebrate these things. These are really what matters. You see it. I've seen it. I've heard about it. I know it intellectually. Now I need to apply that. And it's like these micro celebrations, these micro acknowledgements to myself and to other people are, they're like those little footholds that that motivate us and keep us going. If you're just putting everything out there and nobody sees it, nobody cares, and nobody gives you any feedback, it's exhausting, because you're like, you don't even know, it's just going into a vacuum. And so I'm seeing the impact that has on myself and other people, the negative impact. And so that's why it's a weakness. But it's something that I'm working on with my coach. And yeah, I've heard this.
I appreciate it.
Like,
you're
I've heard
self-aware.
like, Shane, you're intimidating. I'm like, what? Like, I'm so intimidated all the time.
I'm your interpreter, bro. Yeah.
Thank you, dude.
I think you're also really good at finding people's gifts and putting them in a position to thrive. I may have told this story on the podcast before, but this is a big one, man. I mean, we're in the Trends with Benefits podcast studio, the first one that we've done.
This is true.
And
full circle.
Yeah, man. I mean, years ago, you introduced me to the very first podcast I ever listened to, Joe Rogan with Aubrey Marcus, one of the first ones they did. And you told me that I should start a podcast. And it was something that I was like, oh, yeah, that could be cool. You're like, you should. And I often say it was the best decision I've ever made in my life. The worlds that has opened up for me and the different ways of thinking that have just been so pleasurable and so spiritually satisfying has been just non-trivial, and it's led me to writing. It wouldn't have been without podcasting that I don't think I would have started writing and really taking that on as a vocation without interviewing a lot of writers. And you know, about 2 years ago, I was going through a pretty rough time in my life. I was living up in Santa Cruz in an RV. You know, I'd gone through a big breakup and wanted to be a writer. I was doing some freelance journalism, but wasn't really sure what that next step was. Yeah. And you really saw that skill in me, and you said, come down to LA and let's fucking do this. And it's... I'm just really grateful, man. I mean, you have allowed me to be a writer, and you've put me in touch with my potential in a really big way. And now sitting here in the studio is something I'm very grateful for, man.
Oh yeah, and we have this packaging here that I designed with all his words that he wrote. Yeah, it's beautiful when you see those synchronicities. Again, it's like woo-woo, all of those things, but I think it's when I see them pop up, I'm like, I'm on the right path. When you start to see those things, you're like, that's beyond coincidence, and you feel that. And yeah, man, it's interesting. Like I don't, if you were to ask me like what I feel like my strengths are, it's like I self-identify with different strengths than that. But I do see, when I see someone's skill, I can see how it can be applied to so many things. So I definitely have a skill in that visualization aspect of like seeing something and seeing the potential in it and like the possibilities in it. And that it applies to a person, but also just any old idea. And I would say if there's like any one strength that I have, or like master strength or superpower, I don't know what it's called, but it's something in that range where when I'm talking with someone and about an idea, a solution to a problem, or a person and their skill sets, my mind, it's hard to describe. It's like 1,000 simulations happen at once where I can see, you know, the one path and like where that might work or not work. Next path, like slight adjustment. You know, it's just like running all these simulations like a computer would, like an algorithm might. And through that, I'm like, I see something. I see like a path. And, or potentially like for some ideas, it's like, I just don't see that. Like for these, it's hard to explain. It takes me a while to communicate, to turn whatever happened into like language, to the alphabet and words. But that's a skill I'm looking to master as sort of like a complement to that.
Yeah.
And I've thought about like, where does that come from? And where I've sort of landed is being in design, this combination of pursuing a career in design before starting this company, where it was primarily user interface design and user experience design, where you are incentivized to make rapid and thorough assumptions about what people think about what you're doing. And what you're doing is designing an interface. So you're like, someone might be confused here, someone might be interested here, someone might be happy here, someone might understand what to do there. And you're just running all these simulations to try to like QA test what could go wrong and what is the best solution. So that's one thing. And then I've always just been extremely self-conscious. And so it's like I'm, building the skill of optimizing things and minimizing potential downsides, but there's table stakes. And it's like this like deep fear of not being enough, deep fear of being made fun of. So it's like I put it's not like I'm just doing design to like design. It's like literally feels bigger. And so I think over the years, I put like way more, like I just thought about it, like obsessed over that, and just built these mental pathways that like when I think of something and just like I see like a million interpretations of it like at once.
I was just going to say, it's interesting that you didn't see the pathway to yourself exploding in the hyperbaric chamber, Mr. fucking genius.
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
I didn't put it in my simulation.
I like sometimes just like, seeing what happens. It's a rush.
It's a rush. It's fucking crazy not knowing the future sometimes, bro. Yeah.
I don't know the future.
Man, this place has good juju.
Yeah, it's also hot.
It's hot, yeah. It's hot.
I like that.
It's because this conversation's so good. The AC's like on low.
I want to be in like a cold.
But these mics are just flaming up, man.
Sauna.
This is fun, man.
This is super fun.
Many more to come.
Yeah, I'd love to get into a cadence where it's almost like these little journal entries, like what's been going on with the company and I mean, one of the things I've learned and become very grateful for with this company and aware of is that Kyle's amazing at pretty much everything. No, it's committing yourself to something can be like in anything, but I think when you're committing yourself with a group of people towards something that you believe in can be an amazing personal growth tool, especially if it's at a company that's pretty small. And the reason is because when you work for a larger company, you can put your strengths forward and you can kind of like hide your weaknesses, your shadow side. And because the company's so big and because you're only responsible for a small piece of it, people just leverage your strengths and they're like, see ya at the end of the day. When you're working for a startup, you kind of, everything's exposed. Like your shadow sides are there, your gifts are there, and you're able to kind of see and work with it all just because you have to wear a lot of hats. It's really fast moving. There's not like the direction's changing all the time. You got to be flexible. And so you can like be triggered. A lot of your like stuff comes up and it's an opportunity to work on it. It's pretty wild. Like it could be like like therapy, just working in an environment like this where it's high stress.
Right. It's like thinking that you can't be creative at a real job within confines. I think that similarly people think that they need to be outside of the system to work on themselves and heal traumas, make it through bad thought patterns. Yeah. But that kind of daily pressure and needing to work with people, needing to come to a creative solution with a bunch of people in the room is also a way to become more psychologically durable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we try to make investments to kind of double down on this. I mean, right before I jumped in this podcast room, I just got off a 2-hour phone call with our leadership team where I was crying. Like it was with a coach and we were guided through like just basically expressing what's coming up. And when you're working on a startup, a lot's coming up. It's stressful and you're being confronted because it's kind of like bringing everything, all your whole self is coming out into, it needs to be leveraged because we need all the creative thoughts. We need your skill sets, but your weaknesses can also be helpful too because it just allows us to kind of make abstract connections between things and build chemistry. So yeah, it's been a fun journey, and I think that if we do these somewhat regularly, there will be some fruitful things to share with people.
Do you have a thought you've been telling yourself recently, or a mantra or a sentence that has been important for you? I love myself.
I love myself. I love myself. I love lamp. I did some body work, and the gentleman who was doing the body work, he's like, I think you should apply this mantra like every night. And it's and for whatever reason, like he was like, did some adjustment on my arm, and he's like, yeah, I think you need this. And I was like, okay. But the mantra is, I genuinely want to release the emotions of despair and apathy and replace them with the power of infinite love now and forever. And so he's like, just repeat that to yourself 20 times every single night.
Say it once more.
I genuinely want to release the emotions of despair and apathy and replace them with the power of infinite love now and forever. So yeah, my arm is just fucked up, I guess. But so I've been, I'm down for a challenge. So I've been like, I say that 20 times every night. And
you say that 20 times every night?
Just to myself, yeah. For the past couple months.
You're a psychopath, but you're the best kind of psychopath.
And it's like interesting because then you start to like just think about like words, like what is apathy? Like dive in and you're like, where does that, is that in my arm? No, but like it just opens up to, it just opened me up to like interesting explorations. But I wouldn't say it's like profound, but I do love trying things on, just seeing what it's like. And so that's one of them.
My man. Mad scientist, Mr. Shane Heath. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, dude. Thanks for being a part of this.